Face the fear, build the future. Lobotomy Corporation's Steam page gives a decent starting point for describing the game. A roguelite monster management simulation inspired by the likes of the SCP Foundation, Cabin in the Woods, and Warehouse 13. Order your employees to perform work with the creatures and watch as it unfolds. Harness greater energy and expand the facility. If you're familiar with SCP, the concept of Lobotomy Corp is very simple to understand. There's a secret facility containing anomalous things ranging from unspeakable horrors to fairy tale creatures to dangerous artifacts. On occasion, these anomalies, or in the case of Lobotomy Corp, abnormalities, will try to break out. Where SCP usually puts you in the first-person perspective during one of these breakouts, Lobotomy Corp has you playing the role of manager for day-to-day operations of the facility. Your duties as manager are threefold. First, you need to send workers to study each abnormality to figure out its strengths, weaknesses, and how to keep it contained. Second, if one does break out, you need to send your employees to go and recontain it. Third, you have a daily quota of energy you need to meet. By studying each abnormality, they release a substance called Inkafallen, which in-game is used as an energy source. Different abnormalities will release different amounts of energy, the largest amounts coming from the most dangerous creatures. To do all this, you have the help of Angela, your personal AI assistant, who guides your personal development. Each day you'll also expand the facility, picking new abnormalities you'll need to take care of. At first you won't know what these are, so you may pick the most benign thing possible, or you may get an abnormality which needs constant maintenance. Being a roguelite, once an abnormality is researched, it is researched forever across all runs. Also, as you expand the facility, you'll meet a colorful cast of AI department managers, also known as the Sephiroth. Over 100 hours into it, I can firmly say I enjoy and absolutely recommend it, but not for the reasons I anticipated when I first picked the game up. Nothing game-breaking, more so side effects of this being the first game put out by an at-the-time inexperienced development studio. As a result, Lobotomy Corp serves as the bedrock for Project Moon's entire universe, both from a franchise lore perspective and the developers taking their lessons learned and applying them to make something even better on their next try. From where they started to what we got in the final product, there were nothing but improvements, and this trend continued into their second game, Library of Ruina, where they took their lessons learned and made something even better. But first, a history. Lobotomy Corp was the first game created by South Korean studio Project Moon. The team was small, 6 students strong, but they were passionate and had a vision for the game. However, like all college students, they were flat broke. They pitched the idea on Tumblebug, a South Korean crowdfunding platform very similar to Kickstarter, including a video, art samples, GIFs, and sketches of the basic mechanics of the game. Unfortunately, the video no longer plays on the page, but you can still find their older YouTube channel, Moon Project, with videos from the time. The earliest one is probably our safest bet for what they used, showing examples of room and department layouts and explanations of mechanics in the form of the manager's handbook. Unfortunately, I can't really tell you much more about it because the video is in Korean and they rely heavily on text. I can tell you that they blew through their fundraising goal, being backed 7.5 times what they originally asked. They ended up raising just over 15 million won, which at today's conversion rate comes out to just under $12,000. A few months later, they released their first public demo and the Welcome to Our Corp trailer. At this phase of development, the game looked like it almost took place in the 50s or 60s, between the somewhat cheery music and visual style. If you were to play it at this point, you'd also see quite a few examples of analog tech. The menus looking like they were on CRTs, and Angela being more of an advanced chatbot than what we'd think of as an AI. You can even play this legacy version of the game if you go under the Steam betas and choose it. Some of these elements stay the same, especially some of the early abnormalities. But over the course of 2 years of development, the tone went from a casual mid-century company to something more futuristic, darker, and more clinical feeling. And for what they aimed to portray, this was absolutely the right choice. The art style for the majority of the game is somewhat toonish. As you expand the facility though, each department has a unique look and they slowly get more complex with their textures. Populating the departments you'll see your workers, whom the community lovingly refer to as nuggets. The nuggets are quite simply designed and are made to be easily randomly generated with a handful of hair, eye, and mouth presets that get swapped out when they're added to your roster. This contrasts the abnormalities quite well, because while some keep it simple, others can be quite detailed by comparison, with quite a bit of texture and shading in a little package. During the parts of the game where you're talking with Angela or the Sephiroth, this transitions to a format which is a tad more detailed. The characters look much closer to a normal anime style you'd be used to in a visual novel, but with slimmer bodies than you normally expect, which makes their heads appear much larger by comparison, keeping in line with the look of the nuggets. The backgrounds are the same as the main rooms for each department, but have more texture to them. Each character also has their own distinct style and color, and their department background matches up with it. At a glance, you can tell which background belongs to who. These transitions don't stand out at all, instead making it feel like you really did just zoom all the way into one of the rooms. There are times where the game breaks from this style to great effect though. Fairly early on, it's revealed that your job requires you to view the facility through something called a cognition filter, which was developed to prevent shock and PTSD during the war, but is now mostly used for commercial purposes. When you see an employee die, they look like a doll splattered with red paint, and the abnormalities instead look like toys. So while you see this, your employees see this. This also means Angel has a different appearance in reality than what you're used to, and this is true for all characters. There are fairly few songs in the OST, but they're all pretty easy on the ears. When all is going well, you'll likely be listening to one of the neutral themes, which are all fairly similar in how they sound, but with different sounds and instruments layered into them. As you play, there's also 3 different levels of emergency, depending on how out of control things get, and each has their own theme. The music for story sections also consist of fairly few themes, but the tonal shift from gameplay to story and back keeps things from getting repetitive. Mechanically is where things start to slide somewhat. Within a single run, the core gameplay loop works quite well, and it's broken up into 2 phases. The first phase is the preparation phase, and it includes the extraction of that day's abnormality, that day's story sequence, and then employee management, including the hiring, equipping, and leveling up of your agent's stats. When all of that's taken care of, you enter the second phase, also called the management phase. This is the bulk of the game, and where you accomplish those duties I mentioned earlier, studying, containing, and producing energy from abnormalities. Once your daily energy quota is met, you can end that day's shift and move on to the next one. Each day you expand the facility, get a new abnormality, and your quota increases. At first you won't know what the abnormalities are. The extraction screen will show an identification number and a quote relating to that abnormality's background. As your agents perform different kinds of work, you'll see this bar on the left of the containment cell start to fill. Red boxes mean a negative result happened, and green mean a positive result happened. When the work order is finished, you'll see a face of a different color indicating how the work order as a whole went. Green for a positive result, red for a negative result, and yellow for a normal result. The range will be different for each abnormality and can cause different effects to happen. The positive energy boxes contribute both to your overall energy production and give you points to research that abnormality specifically, such as its name, damage it deals, and the ranges for each outcome, as well as which kind of work will produce the most energy based on your agent's level, and tips specific to managing that abnormality. As you fill this page out and continue getting positive energy boxes, you can instead spin them to get gear to equip your agents with, in the form of weapons and armor. Similarly, in the top left you can switch to the story records for each abnormality, which talk about their origin. This starts with minimal information, but will get filled out as you learn more about the abnormality. Each abnormality also has a counter on its cell, and when this reaches 0, something will happen. It could breach, it could call a random employee into its cell, or it could do something else. Each abnormality is different. The counter is influenced by 2 things, the first being the information in the management tips. Some will have the counter drop if the work result is positive or negative, meaning you have to thread the needle and get a neutral result. Some need workers below or above a certain skill level. Some require you to look at them while they're being worked, while others require you to look away. Again, each abnormality is different. The other thing that influences the counter is this bar on the top left of the screen, which fills up each time you put an agent to work. When it's full, this many random cells will enter meltdown, meaning you have to send a worker to them before the timer runs out. If you fail to do so, the counter on each of those cells will drop by 1, and some of your energy disappears. After a certain day, you'll also start experiencing the ordeals, which will sometimes replace the random meltdowns. Instead, what happens is creatures appear throughout the facility. All are hostile, but the specifics will be different. Some are specifically aimed at killing your employees, some will try to release your abnormalities, and some will try to steal your research. You can tell which is which by the color of the text. They're also split up by the time of day they occur. You'll always experience dawn ordeals first, then noon, then dusk, then midnight, each being of a higher threat level than the last. Early on, they can be intimidating as you get no information on the specifics of what they do or how to deal with them. Personally, they're one of the few cases where I'd suggest looking at the wiki, at least when you start seeing noon onward. From that point on, they can wipe entire departments if you don't know what you're doing. Depending on what day you're on, what abnormalities you have, and the pace you're playing at, not doing so can set you back 30 minutes to an hour if you have to restart late in the day. Speaking of, you will have to occasionally reset your facility. Sometimes you just need to restart a single day, but you also have a checkpoint every 5 days if you need to roll back further than that. In fact, it might be beneficial to just restart from the beginning, especially once you fully research some abnormalities and get permanent benefits from doing Sephiroth missions. As much as I enjoy the game, the necessity of these resets prevent me from giving it a 10 out of 10, as there's limited variety from run to run. Angela will say the same thing on day 1 of your first run as she will on day 1 of your 10th run. Pretty much the only thing that changes is the abnormalities you get and in what order you get them. Thankfully, they're all pretty unique, either being wholly original or some very creative takes on existing fairy tale creatures, like the characters from The Wizard of Oz, Snow White's Apple, or Little Red Riding Hood. Each has a different process for proper management, and some have interactions with other abnormalities. Also, as mentioned, your research is persistent between runs. Where you once saw an ID number, you'll now know the name of the abnormality and can plan accordingly. Any gear you received will also be persistent between runs unless the employee wielding it dies, so you can stock up on gear in one run, reset, and then in this fresh facility fully kit out your agents. This makes each subsequent run marginally faster as you can suppress escaped abnormalities and ordeals quicker in an easier to manage facility. However, you don't want to make your facility too easy because easy abnormalities produce less energy, which can drag your day out, making things that much longer. I think the biggest casualty of the developers being inexperienced is the story. Not so much the writing, as it's actually really good and why I recommend the game. Unlike other games in this genre, which are mostly freeform story generators like I've talked about in the past, Lobotomy Corp's tale is linear, but it does a damn good job of keeping you interested when you learn something new. What I mean is the way the story's delivered, as it's somewhat fragmented. The game takes place over the course of 50 days, and these daily conversations with Angela are the unchanging part of the story that you'll experience in all runs of the game. As a result, if you don't get too deep into it, your experience is going to be a fairly dry one, as it's not until days 21 through 30 that Angela starts talking about why things are the way they are. In addition to Angela, there's also the Sephiroth. When you first unlock their department, you'll have a meeting with them to learn more about what they do for the company and learn more about them as a person. They also give you missions to complete as you play the game, and upon completion, you'll get more story revealed to you and a permanent buff relating to what their job is. Each of the characters is well written and distinct from one another, but also interact with and contrast each other quite well. Completing these missions also give you hints about the true nature of the company much earlier than what Angela will tell you. But the biggest reveal happens when you complete the 5th Sapphira's 3rd mission, as it's required by all earlier characters in order to finish their quest lines. I believe this can be done at earliest on day 25, assuming you're playing the game perfectly on your first playthrough. Thankfully, the quest lines don't reset, so they can be finished over the course of a couple runs if needed. Technically, to beat the game, you just need to reach day 50, but this becomes significantly easier if you finish the Sephiroth's quest lines, as doing so provides some major permanent buffs, including preventing random meltdowns in their department. To get the true ending, which leads into the second game, you also have to have the codex at 100%, meaning all abnormalities have to be fully researched. If you don't mind having a bit of a grind, I'd personally suggest playing the game blind in terms of narrative, but with a guide on some of the mechanics so you don't get stuck. Originally, I wanted to go in depth on the narrative, but to really give it justice would require this video being absurdly long, even abbreviating certain parts of it. This is because not only of the daily happenings, but also because of the personal stories of each of the Sephiroth giving you a significant amount of context as to what is happening and why. Heck, even the most general of summaries would likely double the length of this video while still leaving out a lot of context. But I don't want to leave you hanging though, so I will talk about the themes of the narrative. Speaking in the broadest possible terms, the game is a story about redemption. Some people were wronged, others have regrets, and still others tried their best to make the situation better only to fall short. They deal with topics like drug abuse, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and the human condition. And it's not like the game fixes these people either. More so, it's about them coming to terms with the situation and learning how to move on in spite of it. How this happens at a secretive company with no regard for human life is up for you to find out. Like I said, I enjoy this game, and I think the story is really good, but the method the story is delivered to you makes it difficult to get into without getting a decent way into the game. There's two mechanics I can blame this on, the roguelite element being one of them. However, because they're major spoilers with very little context as to what's happening, I'm just going to give a timestamp to jump to the conclusions. I actually enjoy knowing that there are in-universe explanations to these mechanics, but knowing them early on will impact your experience with the game. Good? Good. Alright, so the most pressing mechanic I take issue with is the roguelite element. This is explained by the existence of the TT2 protocol. TT2 is a function of the facility that keeps everything inside in a 50-day time loop. A, the founder of Lobotomy Corp, did this to build up an immense amount of energy for a special project. This project being the whole reason for Lobotomy Corp's existence. To explain what that project is, I'd need to delve deeper into the lore, but when you beat the game, you also finish that project. Right now, all you need to know is that an unfortunate side effect of TT2 is that Angela and the Sephiroth actually remember each loop. The Sephiroth periodically get their memories wiped as they start to break down, but Angela never has this issue because of how advanced she is. Not only that, but she was designed to perceive the world 100 times slower than everyone else. As part of the time loop, A gave her essentially a script to follow for each of the 50 days. She even makes references to this, calling the events of the game a play at multiple points. Angela being trapped in this loop is actually why the true ending happens, leading to Library of Ruina. Once A's goal is achieved, she considers herself free, and finally exerts some self-determinance as she no longer has to listen to A's orders. I appreciate that the writers were able to come up with an explanation why everything is the same in each run, and even go as far as to use that as a character's motivation to set up the next game. Gameplay-wise, however, I feel like it drug things out significantly longer than it needed to be. Alternatively, they could have added some variety, making reference to the past manager's actions in each subsequent run. The other mechanic I take issue with is the core suppressions, or more specifically, when you're introduced to them. A core suppression is essentially a puzzle fight boss battle that happens when you finish one of the Sephiroth's quest lines. It's actually the result of the Sephiroth beginning to break down and go insane. But rather than wiping their memory, you instead bring them back from the edge, and the event actually leads to personal growth both for them and for your player character. I think part of the reason a lot of people dropped out early on and found the game dry is because you have to get a significant portion into the game to unlock this mechanic, as it's the mechanic I mentioned needing to finish Tifereth's 3rd mission for. Not being exposed to this earlier also means people don't know the benefit of going out of their way to do them. Finishing a core suppression unlocks some major benefits, which makes all future runs significantly easier to do. Faster research, agents hailing anywhere in a department, department, starting your employees at level 3 instead of level 1. Knowing I could get these would have made me go out of my way to do them, but the existence of this mechanic is totally hidden from you until you finish that mission. And finishing that mission requires a decent time investment into the game. I actually would have been one of those people who dropped the game early if my friend hadn't given me hints on the existence of core suppressions and told me to stick with it. I'm glad I did, because on top of making the game significantly easier, the lore drops from finishing a core suppression really make the characters pop. So, should you play it? Well, if you're expecting a story generator type of game with near infinite replayability, then no. If you're expecting a game with a single engaging story, then maybe. The gameplay is good, difficult, but lacks variety, and you don't get to the good part of the narrative until halfway through. There's quite a few mechanics that aren't fully explained that I feel should have been. About a third of the way through, I was probably going to drop it if a friend of mine had not had me push all the way through to the halfway point. Basically, from that point on, I used the wiki to spoil myself on mechanics as to not softlock myself and actually progress the story, while also doing my best to prevent narrative spoilers. With this in mind, I do recommend the game, but not at its full price of $25. It tends to go on sale for pretty cheap, and I think in the most recent Steam sale it was around $8. This recommendation goes from a maybe to an absolutely though if you want to play Library of Ruina. Library of Ruina is the direct sequel to Lobotomy Corp, though it's an entirely different genre of game, being a deck builder instead of a management sim. The story quality is still great, but it's much better paced and the gameplay has more polish. On top of that, the art is more detailed with more variety in characters and locations, and it's even partially voice acted, though only in Korean. Project Moon were also able to successfully take their lessons learned and apply them to make an even better game. Seeing this progression for the studio actually makes me excited for Lobotomy Corp 2, which has been confirmed as one of their many future projects after they released their third game, Limbus Company. So what do you think? Were there any parts I didn't touch on, or do you wholly disagree with me? I look forward to hearing your comments. Oh, and before I go, do not trust this man. He does not have free candy in his van.